It would probably take me a month, or at least several weeks to render one of our shots at full resolution, at full length.
And on the render network, what would you estimate that would take?
I would say it takes a few hours. Um,
A few hours.
yeah, a
Okay.
few hours.
Wow.
The whole pipeline and the whole workflow is just it's just amazing to use the render network. I can't do it without it now. Now I'm like,
Welcome to the Render Network. My name is Sunny, and this is the Render Network podcast, the Render Pod. Should we call it the Render Pod? Let me know in the comments. And I'm from the Render Network Foundation. The Render Network Foundation is a not-for-profit which is dedicated to maintaining the core Render Network protocol and growing its community. I literally read it from here. You can take a look at the site. We have grants as well. Essentially, if you're an artist who wants to get something rendered out, if you're a studio that has sequences, animations to do, submit a quick pitch right here. Literally 500 words. Let us know what you want a grant for, and then we can grant you some Render Network tokens to use on the Render Network. The Render Network is the world's first decentralized GPU rendering platform which harnesses idle GPU power worldwide, providing near limitless rendering capacity at a fraction of the cost. So artists that want to render their work faster, at a higher resolution, and more affordably than anything else that exists can use the Render Network. You're welcome to join us on Telegram, Discord, X, Facebook, LinkedIn, anything that you use, we do too. To find out more about the Render Network, visit rendernetwork.com. This week on the show, we have a very special guest. Now, our guest has used the Render Network extensively, really testing the limits of the Render Network, rendering in 12K for various production workflows. I'll let him go into this. He is a veteran of the 3D industry. He's been using virtual productions, Unreal Engine, Octane Render, Cinema 4D, Blender, everything you can imagine. So I am happy to introduce our guest for today's show. This is Alex Pearce. Alex, how are you?
I'm good. I'm good. Yeah, I can't complain. How are you doing?
Awesome. Yeah, I'm good. I'm good. It's chucking it here, absolutely, wet and rainy, but the UK does what the UK does.
Yep. Yeah, it's hurricanes in a lot of the U.S., but it's like 70 degrees and sunny here in Los Angeles. So it has
Nice.
been like 150 degrees. So I'm it's not all bragging here, but yeah, I'm loving the weather right now.
Awesome. I am slightly envious. Slightly. So, Alex, tell us a little bit about yourself. I think if I was to tell our audience about you, I do a little bit of an injustice. So, how
Yeah.
about you tell our audience?
Sure, yeah. So I'm Alex Pearce. I'm the title I gave myself about 5 years ago as a creative technologist. At that time, I don't think that was a real title, but I think it seems like nowadays there's lots of people that with that title. But I think it's the best thing that summarizes what I am or what I do because I'm more. I don't want to say more than a 3D artist, but I do a lot of different things. I do stuff with 3D modeling and 3D art. I do stuff with virtual production and camera side. I do stuff with visual effects and traditional VFX. I do interesting stuff with storage. So I think I think probably, especially these days, a lot of people are multi-hyphenated individuals who don't just do one thing or the other. But I feel like I have made a career out of being a jack of all trades. And I used to say master of none. Now I say master of some because I do know I do know some things pretty well. But yeah, I have a background. I went to film school. I got into 360 filmmaking, in like 2014, early Oculus days. I did a lot of stuff
Wow.
with really high-end 360 video. I was at a company called Jaunt VR, which did I did a lot of stuff. I did high-end sports stuff. I was the DP for an Apple commercial. It was them showing off Final Cut when they first released their 360 video tools. Basically, I was the cinematographer, and we went and shot all of these beautiful sunsets and with this crazy, at that time, red camera rig. And then I got into 3D, and then I went down that rabbit hole for a while. And now I'm sort of combining a lot of the things I've learned over the last decade or so, from 360 video to CG to 3D rendering. And I'm just starting a company called SimPlates, sim-plates.com. And we're going to be talking a lot about that over the course of this. But basically, they're fully rendered CG car plates for car process work, meaning basically anytime you shoot a commercial or a TV show and there's two actors driving in a car, there's basically the way it's filmed is very similar to the way it was filmed 100 years ago, just with more modern techniques. Now there's an LED screen behind the actors or beside the actors, and there's content playing on those walls. Well, basically I'm focusing on creating content for those walls for a very specific customer base. And so, yeah, I think the broad answer is I'm a creative technologist. I do interesting stuff with 3D and with cameras and with technology in general.
Okay, excellent. That's a perfect summary. And a jack of all trades, master of some.
Yeah.
And you know what? It's yeah, the perfect thing. I think there's a lot of interdisciplinary artists out there who do a variety of different things because you know what? It's one of those things when you're passionate about something related to film and photography, 3D kind of falls in line with that.
Yeah.
Yeah. So it's like an extension of film, I guess.
Yeah. I also think that, 10 years ago, especially in the film industry, but even in other disciplines as well, I think the idea was you really need to focus on one thing and one thing only. And it was kind of like frowned upon to do more than one thing. But I think, especially this next generation of filmmakers, it's just not the case. And that there are a lot of benefits to knowing the whole pipeline or the whole, the bigger picture, to be able to understand, not so that you do every single, role, but so that you can communicate with other artists as well. And so you can know, in my case, it's benefited me a lot in knowing what an artist can or can't do on a particular project. Knowing that this software has its limits and these are those limits. And also knowing the opposite of when an artist is saying, no, this can't be done, and knowing that, well, no, I know it can be done because I could do it. If I jumped on the box right now, I could actually do this, and let me help you understand how to do it,
Yeah,
So,
yeah. Yeah, that's cool. Yeah, step aside. Let me show you how it's done. That's what you mean.
Yeah, maybe, sometimes, very rarely, very rarely.
Yeah.
No, I mean, luckily, I try my best to surround myself with people who are better than me at all those things because I know it. I can spot when someone really knows what they're talking about, and I can go, okay, this person actually knows more than I do. I want to work with this person, and they got a great attitude. And there's no ego. Like, this person. Yeah. This person. Shout out to Mike Hodgetts. He's my favorite. He's my lead 3D artist, and he's definitely that person. He's far he's at a whole other level than I am, especially in Blender.
That's cool. Yeah, surrounding yourself with people who actually know more about you in particular disciplines, I think is essential because we can learn so much through YouTube and everything else, but learning from someone who's actually doing this, it's so valuable.
Yep.
How did you get into the field of virtual productions?
Yeah, it's a good question. So virtual production, technically I did my first virtual production job. I was when I was at Jaunt, this is probably 2016, I directed a piece for the Kia Stinger. So the Kia Stinger, when they announced the Kia Stinger and they had the big demo at the Detroit Car Show, I basically went and filmed in Europe and in the US. We filmed a bunch of driving scenes and we did a fully CG car for the Kia Stinger. And we had a VR headset experience. And then we also had, at the Detroit Auto Show, we had an LED wall that surrounded the car and we projected the image onto the wall. And so that was, I didn't realize that that's what it was at the time. I didn't know that. I don't even know if there was. I don't think they were calling it that at the time. But essentially, I was doing car process virtual production in like 2016.
Wow.
And then when the next company I was at was called Miller Creative, and we did virtual reality training for United Airlines. And I started seeing the virtual production technology probably like 2018, 2019. I was probably, starting to think, wow, this could be really interesting because, we have this client. It's very difficult to go to the airport and film these executives. So they have to come down to the airport. We have to, get through security. We have to do all these things. And then we film and then we go back. And so I started thinking, well, we could leverage this technology, even if it was green screen, to make virtual reality training and even just promotional videos and other things. We could make it easier and faster and safer. And so I started exploring that a little bit, and kind of ran into. We were so busy at that time that it was hard to get any R&D time. And then when COVID hit, we had a project that was supposed to shoot on location in. I think it was going to shoot in Bulgaria for a large tech company. And because of COVID, we were like, well, we can't shoot it anymore. And what I pitched to them was, well, what if we did green screen virtual production? Then we could still have this scene. The scene was like, 3 or 4 people sitting at a table, and it was like a soft skills training. And so people are talking to each other and whatever. I said, what if we shoot a green screen? We only film one actor at a time, so only one person ever has to have their mask off. And we shoot it on green screen, and we can use virtual production to see what it's going to look like, to light against that while we're on set. So we'll have the green screen, but we'll have a live feed, going back to the cinematographer and to Video Village and everything else, so people can see what it looks like or what it's going to look like. And we can make adjustments for lighting. We can make adjustments on the content, re-render. And at that time, I was using Octane for Blender. Is exactly what I was using. And I was basically just rendering still images of 360 still images for the background plates based on where the camera position was for each actor and for each setup. And so we did that. The client was on like a Zoom call, and I remember one of the main clients didn't know it was green screen. He thought we were in Bulgaria. He thought we were on location for at least 20 or 30 minutes, and then eventually I realized he was like, how'd you guys fly over there? I didn't think we could get a flight. And I was like, oh, no. And so I started showing him I was screen recording as well on my computer. So I sort of showed him it was green screen, and you could see his mind being blown. And it was really a cool feeling. And that was really kind of, for me, what was like really made me passionate about it. And so we did at that company, we did a few more things, but I was based in LA and that company was in Chicago. So, I told my boss at the time, hey, you need to find someone local, because a lot of this stuff requires you to plug, a lot of it is on set, like plugging stuff in, turning stuff on, especially with Unreal Engine. There's a lot of headaches that you can't solve remotely, and there's a lot of stresses and stuff that you just can't deal with if you're across the country. So, so eventually I left that company, and specifically because I wanted to pursue virtual production in a full-time capacity. I wanted to go down that rabbit hole and see how far it would go. And so that's when I joined my last company, Lightsail VR. I joined as a business partner, which I could talk a little bit about that later. But that's what I've done over the last several years is I brought up this whole other vertical inside of Lightsail to do virtual production services. And we've done various things. We've done different projects for different clients. We did a thing for Sabrina Carpenter recently. It was like a VR 180 experience, and we did some virtual production on set. But the bigger thing has led to SimPlates, which the product I was mentioning earlier, which I'll talk about later. That's sort of where all the skill sets I've learned, all the things I've gathered, as well as where the industry is and where the industry is going. I feel that's the most pressing need for the industry. So that's sort of where we've come to.
How do you think virtual productions will evolve with advancements in compositing tools and techniques? And how do you think this will impact the filmmaking and visual effects landscape? Because technology is moving at such a fast rate, especially in the past year with AI and things.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, it's a great question, and one that I will give an answer. I'll give you my thoughts, but I don't think that anyone really knows where it's going or how fast it's going to get there and whatever. But I do think in general with virtual production, up until recently, it's been the only real render engine in the game has been Unreal Engine, and it's been great for lots of reasons. And Unreal Engine, you know, I have a love-hate, like most people, I have a love-hate relationship with the software. But one of the things I am very excited about is that lots of other render engines are and hardware, because of hardware advancements and render advancements, I think there will eventually be several competitors to Unreal Engine in terms of, you know, what render engines you can use for virtual for what we think of as virtual production, mainly being a full 3D, real-time, you know, interactive virtual production. Obviously, I'm slightly biased towards Octane Render, and some of the working that they're doing now, and where that's going to go and when we're going to get that, I don't know, but that's going to be real exciting, and certainly, you know, between Blender and Redshift and you know, and Chaos Group has stuff that they're working on and they're doing now, and like I think I'm excited for there to be you know, more than one render engine option, for lots of reasons. For the same reason that, you know, I use lots of different render engines, especially over the past. I've used lots of different render engines for different things, and you know, there's pros and cons to all of them, and some of them have a specific look that some filmmakers like and or some artists like, and I think there should be more than one option. Just generally, I think that you shouldn't be limited to just one, and I think competition is only going to be good for everyone. But yeah, AI is a whole, you know, is obviously a whole other topic. You know, one of the things up until now has been, well, you know, the studios can't really touch it because if they do, they're going to run into, you know, legal issues. Well, studios have already figured out, of course, they've already figured out sort of not how to get around it, but how to work with it in an ethical way, and that is mainly by training your own data. So a lot of these studios are already taking, if they already own the IP for, you know, whatever, their whole library of content, they can train, they can have a team train that data. So it's IP that they own, it's data that they know where it came from, and then it's ethical and legal for them to use that data. And so in some ways it's exciting, in some ways it's scary, especially as somebody who, you know, makes a living in 3D and otherwise. You know, there's certainly the you know, well, where is this going to go and everything else. My personal opinion on AI in general, when it comes to, you know, a lot of artists sort of fearing for jobs and otherwise, is that AI has, in terms of art, has sort of been doing this skyrocket up. It's just been like going straight up in terms of development and everything else. But it's basically already plateaued. It's not you know, we saw like every month it was getting better, and now it's like, well, now it doesn't look like it's getting any better because there is a ceiling. You can only train on so much data, and if you have too much data, that's gonna, you know, that's also gonna in some ways degrade the model and otherwise. And so I think that, you know, there's something to be said, and especially with filmmaking. I love filmmaking. I love being on set, and I love the craft of filmmaking. Really is at its core is a collaborative medium. You know, surely films and things have been done with a single person or a few people, but generally speaking, all the best films were a collaboration of lots of different people, writers, cinematographers, directors, you know, artists, VFX, everything. It's a big collaboration. And I think that's something you can't really get in with just using AI. So you can use AI to assist you in pre-production. You can get it to assist you in post-production, and on set as well. There's lots of techniques you can use AI to, you know, increase productivity and other things, whatever. But I don't think it's going to replace, you know, a massive amount of jobs in and of itself. I think that there's all these technologies, even outside of AI, that do, you know, just the leap in technology and the leap in hardware in general, unfortunately for the 3D artists, you don't need as many people, you don't need as many machines as you used to need. So it's not just that AI is taking jobs and everything else. But yeah, I don't know. It's an interesting thing. I had a good conversation with a guy last week who came and saw me speak at this event that I put on, and that's what he does. He goes to the studios. He takes a specific library and he trains data for that library, and then he generates assets, 3D assets and 2D assets, and all sorts of stuff for them to use. I don't know if they use it for virtual production, if they use it for post. They probably use it for both. But that's definitely an interesting model. But yeah, with virtual production, I think we're still going to have the need to create custom things, but I do think in general the timelines are going to become shorter and shorter, and I think filmmakers are already trying to figure out how to do that. And one of those ways is to use pre-rendered or photographed plates. When I say plates, and you probably hear me say this all the time, I just mean videos. In the VFX world, we call it a back plate or a front plate, and so so that's one thing that I've already been exploring a lot of 2D, 2.5D workflows. Meaning, you have several layers. If you take like a forest, for instance, you have some trees with an alpha layer in the foreground, and then further back in Z-space, further back in depth, you have another set of trees that are at a different distance, and in the far background you have another set of trees. And when you combine that with camera tracking, it looks like you're in a forest. It looks like the trees that are closer to you, they move differently than the ones in the back. And those workflows they speed up production time, and they speed up time on set. And so those things are kind of necessary for production. A lot of productions, to be honest, have already been burned a lot by this promise or this idea that, oh, Unreal Engine it's real time. You can just throw anything up and you can change anything on the fly. What they don't quite realize is that on the biggest productions, on the Disney level productions, they're working like a year in advance before they get to set. They are literally starting a year before, and they're creating the assets, and they're working. The 3D artists are working hand in hand with the cinematographer. The cinematographer is like lighting the CG scene. The production designer and them are working together to create props in the real world that match props in the CG world. And so it takes a long time to build a scene that's really going to work for you, and you're not changing things on the fly on the day. You're not going, maybe this scene should be a sunset instead of a broad day. You've already figured those things out months in advance at least. Yeah. And so a lot of productions don't work that way. Most productions don't have those kinds of budgets. They don't have that kind of prep time. They don't bring in a cinematographer a year before to start looking at CG assets. So a lot of people have already sort of been burned thinking that it's easy, thinking that you just show up and everything's going to be customizable. And the reality is it ends up looking like a video game, and no one's happy. And so what people have started, stages specifically, but filmmakers as well have started figuring out, well, actually, if we photograph our own background plates, if we plan it right, or if we do these 2.5D workflow that I was talking about, or even pre-render these CG plates, then we can get photoreal results. We can work in faster timelines. There's a lot less question marks on the day of like, is this going to work? In some cases, it gives the power back to the filmmakers instead of the stages or the Unreal Engine artists or whatever. So it's interesting. I think it's a necessary phase. I think that certainly there's definitely still a great world to do Unreal Engine stuff. But for myself personally, because I still use Unreal as well, I basically tell people when they start asking, oh, can we make an Unreal scene? I say, sure. How many months do you have in prep? And if they start questioning that, then I say, look, we're going to do this a different way. These are your options, and I give them the options, and then they can decide. Do they have the budget? Do they have the time? Usually, time is the biggest problem. Budget can also be a problem, but time is a bigger one that is hard to get around. So.
Yeah, that's a very interesting take. Because obviously you're surrounded by this, and you use Unreal for proper productions.
I do,
and
yeah.
I think
I have.
Yeah, like how it is. I guess the narrative of Unreal is that it's all completely real time, and it's super easy game engine.
Right.
Something some of these buzzwords. When that's not really the case. Yeah.
Yeah.
That's super interesting.
Yeah, it is interesting. It is interesting. I mean, just to open Unreal takes 10 minutes. Just to open the program.
It does.
It's like, it's going to take me 10 minutes to just open the program. There's no part of that that's real time. But I mean, again, I think with the there's obviously a lot of studios and a lot of movies that make it work, and it works just fine. But yeah, I've had some fun times on set with Unreal, enough to make me go, I think I'm just going to, because the other problem that I've run into before is you just hit a cap, you just hit a limit of like how real you can make it look, depending on what assets you get, especially if you're given assets. This has happened to me before where someone's just given me a project and they're like, okay, make it photoreal, and it's like, I can't really do that. Like the assets themselves aren't good enough, and or the real-time quality of the lighting. It's great. I mean, it really is magic how it works, but it's not path tracing. And their path trace renderer looks okay, but it's the most immature path trace render on the planet as far as I know. I mean, there's not a lot of features. You can't do a render farm, so you can't so even if you, and I have before, I've like, oh, I'll just render out really high-res path traced files from Unreal from the same scene. It looks way better, but I can't do it because you can't split frames on a frame render, on a render farm. So you can send it to Deadline, but it's only going to send one shot to one machine. You can't send frame 1 to machine 1, frame 2 to machine 2, frame 3 to machine 3. You can't scale it. So it's like, well, that's not an option. So what are my options? So anyway, I feel like this has turned into an anti-Unreal ad, and that's not really my intent. Again, like I said, Unreal is actually, it is an amazing piece of software, and when used properly, it's an amazing tool. If you're creating the scene from scratch and you have time and money, you can do amazing things in it. The problem is most of these lower budget, and when I say lower budget, I'm talking even still like in the millions, but not the tens of millions, hundreds of millions. The low millions, and of course the lower end commercials and otherwise, they don't have the time or money, and they don't have. But again, time is the biggest thing. It's like, okay, we were doing a thing for. We did something for Discovery recently, a virtual production project, and they were shooting. We were doing these 2.5D workflows, mostly created with AI imagery. And it was like in a forest scene, and then you would take art, probably 30 minutes to get the props set up, and they get the tree set up, and they get this just right, and they get that just right. Get the guy, the actor gets in costume, shoot 1, 2, 3 takes, and then we're on to the next one, and then we're in the ocean, and we're shooting that, and it's like. It's kind of the thing that people think virtual production is, like, oh, you can just switch to scene to scene to scene to scene. We actually were doing that, and doing that in Unreal would have been a nightmare. It would have been a nightmare. Just switching to the other scene would have taken longer than they would have taken art to get set up. So, it's for the quick turnarounds. I think pre-rendered plates are the way to go. Whether that's real content that you've shot, or content that you've got from a Shutterstock or some online library, or pre-rendered CG stuff that you create yourself or someone else created.
Okay, so pre-rendered plates is the way forward.
I think so. I think so, especially even on the highest level. Again, even outside of timeline and budget, I still think there's a lot of benefits to doing it that way. The main thing is planning. If you have a very clear shot list and you know exactly what you're trying to get. A lot of these shots you don't need a fully 3D environment. You think of think of a conversation you watched on, if you watched something last night, think of a conversation. The character's here and they dolly this way and then they dolly in. It's like, that could be a pre-rendered move. So if you want to dolly in, okay, fine, let's pre-render it. And then you just match the movement and you're done. And you can have photoreal, scenes. You don't have to do all these tricks to make it, to make it work. So. I'll be exploring those a lot more. I'm already doing it with my sim plates, but we are definitely exploring how far we can push that, and even like on the day, how far can we push this on the day? If we're on set and they want to do a dolly move, is it possible for us to make a dolly move and then send it to the render network, render it out, get it back, download it, put it in, and run with it? And I think it is possible. I think a lot of it comes down to the logistics of, really the logistics of the stage. How fast is their internet speed? All those things. There's those logistics that have to be accounted for.
Yeah, you'll need to go around with a Starlink, and
Yeah,
just have your own private satellite connection. I
that's
think
right.
that would
That's
be the
right.
next step. Yeah. No, that is really interesting. So, as like an industry thought leader, what trends or innovations are you most excited about in the world of VR and spatial media?
VR and spatial media. Great question. I think I think at the VR side, there's, I do think that the hardware and the ecosystem is definitely getting a lot more mature now. I don't see anything major that I haven't seen or haven't thought of or that's on the horizon. In the spatial world, obviously there's a lot of interesting potentials there. I do have an Apple Vision Pro and Lightsail. We have two of them, and we've created our own tools to view 360 media and 180 stereo media inside of the Apple Vision Pro. And I do think that I had an interesting first experience where I had the headset on and trying things out. And I don't know, to be honest, I don't know what it's going to take for us to get to that next level of like, when is this going to be something that I actually want to just wear around? When is it going to be something that my
Mm,
wife is going to want to actually just put on and walk around and do interesting things with? I think certainly, like a lot of technology, certainly in the training field, there's a lot of interesting things of being able to put someone with a spatial headset and be able to train something that's otherwise really hard, really difficult to do, either because it's dangerous or access or otherwise. That I think is interesting for sure. I am curious. I do think I'm very interested to see like what the next generation of filmmakers and creatives do with it as an entertainment medium, because there are a lot of amazing things that could happen, because the headset is aware that there's a wall over here, and so you could
mm.
imagine that you're watching a film and it's a horror film, and the guy jumps out of the wall and like onto your couch, with an axe or whatever, like that is like could be really a whole other level. And like how do you build for that, and these things, I mean, the technology built for that's already been there for a long time, actually. We've seen people do it with Unity and even for web AR experiences. They can detect like, okay, they know where the floor is, so like something could pop out of the floor, or like
Yeah.
it can be something could be like dripping from the ceiling, whatever. So I don't know how much of it is really going to catch on as like a something that the everyday consumer is going to want or need, but I do think there's going to be really special experiences, just one-on-one experiences of like, oh, I can, I think the idea of the video call where you can like feel like you're right there with somebody is a very
Yeah.
interesting idea, but I don't know. I think the avatars are going to have to come so much further than where they are now before it's going to really feel compelling. So I don't know. I have sort of gone back and forth on it. I was really excited about it, up until my headset came. And even yeah, like the first week I had it, I was really pumped about, oh, this is going to change things. And like, I love like, even just having like my different screens around me. Oh, I have my, you can imagine, oh, I have my Blender viewport over here. I have my Octane standalone viewport over here. I have my Slack over here, my Zoom over here, just like literally on my walls, and I can have this infinite canvas. But the reality is, even if it was comfortable, even if it didn't, even if it was totally
Mm.
comfortable, if it was a pair of glasses on my head, it's like, I don't know that I really want that. I kind of like being able to just close my laptop lid and walk away from it. I don't want
Yeah.
this stuff all across the room. And I don't know. But a lot of this is it's really what the next generation is going to do with it. That's what's really going to like lead the way. If the next generation really catches on to it and they decide that that's really cool, then that is the way the technology will move. So yeah, I don't know. I've sort of I probably sound a little burnt out from it all, but and probably
Yeah.
a little bit of that is true. A little bit of that is true. It's like I like being on set. I like being I like creating stuff, and putting a headset on has always just felt isolating to me. I've sat here on my couch, and watched TV with my wife, and there's been a few times I've put the headset on to do something, and even with the AR where I can see through it, I just still feel like it's isolating. It's putting something on. It's like we're not spending quality time together now.
Yeah,
Even though I can see her, and she can sort of see me, it's not the same,
Yeah, I have to agree. So I don't have an Apple Vision Pro, but I do have a PSVR 2.
Oh
right?
yeah,
So
yeah.
it's a cool device, and playing something like Gran Turismo
Oh wow, yeah, but that's
or
fun.
Resident. Oh, it's so good because you can perceive depth and see down the track, and it's like you're fully immersed in this vehicle.
Yeah,
So every car you can imagine, you're able to actually drive it, and it does add that realism. And going back to what you were saying about next level horror movies, having them pop out of the walls and things.
yeah, yeah.
So playing Resident Evil is
Oh, I bet.
absolutely terrifying.
I bet.
It's like the scariest thing ever. But
Yeah,
it's so much fun. But at the same time, like you said, it is very isolating.
yeah,
There's no getting around that. It's like it's a very, solo device, and yeah, there needs to be something else, something that evolves from that. And one of the things that's in the pipeline, I guess, is like holographic displays.
yeah.
What are your thoughts on those?
Yeah, I think the Meta Connect is going on right now. I think they actually uh, announced a new, some new headset. I didn't really pay attention, to be honest.
Yeah.
I actually do think a friend of mine has the Ray-Bans, the Meta Ray-Bans, and
Mm,
he likes them. He thinks they're pretty cool. They're interesting because they have a speaker, in the glasses. They have camera on the glasses. You can ask it questions, and it's a full AI, so it's more than Siri. It's almost like asking ChatGPT. So you can ask
mm,
it like very cool, like detailed questions, and it'll give you good, like really good answers. And so, I think that, if you combine that, again, the biggest thing is, can they be comfortable as glasses? And, one
yeah.
day the holographic ones might be able to. The ones like the Apple Vision Pro will never be able to be that small just because of physics. But if you're projecting onto the lenses, you can do a lot more with it. And yeah, I think in everyday use they could be really helpful. Even with the Vision Pro, I had thought, like, again, if in a world where these are just simple glasses, there's a lot of interesting, when you're driving, just having your car directions. Well, on mine,
Yeah.
I put my phone on a magnetic thing that's on my dash, but if that doesn't work, and sometimes it falls off, or oh, my magnet didn't work, or I took my case off. If I don't have that and it's like down, or I'm holding it, it's just not safe. And so with
Yeah.
glasses, if you had you could have your full field of view, but then also always have contextual information about, where you're supposed to turn, or where you're supposed to do that. That becomes really interesting. I think the idea of being able to, because I have two kids, and being able to like take pictures or videos without having to like put up my phone and between my eyes and them to take a picture, to be
Yeah.
able to just take
Yeah.
it on the phone or on the glasses. I think that is actually an interesting idea. I think part of the problem, the stigma is, when I've seen people wear these before as well, they have a camera on them. And if you're talking to them, you see that there's a camera on them, and you're very
Mm,
conscious that there's a camera on this. Even if they're not taking a picture, they're not
yeah.
recording,
Yeah.
you just feel weird. It's just kind of a weird, thing. But again, it's really the next generation that's going to decide if that's cool or not. If everyone was wearing them, it
Mm,
wouldn't be weird. But if only one person's wearing them, then it's weird. It's
then it's weird.
yeah.
Yeah.
So uh,
I, I think so. I've tried them at a shop, and just being able to hold your finger and click and capture something is awesome. And I think when you're recording video, it looks like there's two cameras, like one on either side,
yeah.
but one of them is like a sensor with a light. So when
Yes.
you are recording, it shows a light, and it's like it's actually um, not as intrusive as I thought it would be. So it's still an early device. It's
Yeah.
quite interesting. I
Yeah.
am slightly tempted, but I haven't bought it yet. So
Yeah.
yeah, I'm still not 100% convinced.
Yeah, to me, they're still too bulky. They still look, it's too, doesn't look sexy enough.
Yeah,
It's just like one more device, and
that's it.
and even though like, oh, the audio is good, it's like it's not as good as I have the Apple, what are they called? iPods, Apple Pods, iPod, what are they called? Now I can't remember them, but the sound quality is great, and they're not going to beat those. I can
Yeah, yeah,
already, I can already any information I need I can find anyways. It's not like it's definitely not something I need.
yeah.
For me it's gonna be something I need before I like really, for a personal level, buy it.
Yeah, that's it. That's it. I think that the most appealing thing about them is being able to capture images of my kids, like
Yeah,
as we're playing, and if I don't have my phone, it's that thing that's like actually, because they say the best camera you have is the one you've got with you,
right,
right?
right,
So megapixels don't really matter.
right.
Can you talk more about the integration of different render engines like Octane and Redshift and how they improve your virtual production pipeline?
Yeah, so I have a little experience with Redshift. I've tried it out before. And I'm very familiar with Blender cycles, and I'm very familiar with Octane. And for the things I'm doing, one of the things I need for virtual production is really high resolution, and I need them to be fully 360. Equirectangular is the format, and so 12K is sort of 12K 360, so it's 12K by 6K is actually, to me, the minimum resolution I need to render. And for a lot of people, that's really high resolution.
Yeah,
And,
that
and,
is.
and the way to think about it, one way to think about it is like, well, do you really need that resolution? And you can think about it this way. I was shooting a feature, I was the virtual production supervisor for a feature film 2 weeks ago. It's starring Al Pacino and Jessica Chastain. And it's called Lear Rex. It's a reimagining of King Lear. And
Okay.
I can't wait to share all about that whenever the film comes out in a year or whenever it does. But as the virtual production supervisor, I did a lot of things. But I set up the wall with my machine. So I was driving it with the software that I use called Assimilate Live Effects. We were playing back really high resolution captured footage. So we didn't play back CG plates. We were playing real footage that the visual effects supervisor went out and shot. And he shot, I think, 8K plates, and then we had to process them to make them much, much higher resolution. I think we ended up basically at 16K resolution. The stage itself
Wow.
is 14,000 pixels by 2,000 pixels high. That's the resolution of that stage. And that's one of the bigger ones in LA. So you think, okay, this is 14,000, and that's not a full circle. That's not a full, it doesn't wrap around and meet on the other end. It's like a U. So if I have a full 360 and it's 12K and the wall's already 14K, we're already losing some of that resolution. So we actually say, oh, well, maybe we should be
Yeah.
rendering higher resolution. There is a bell curve of sorts of like you start losing, you don't actually gain much more, even from 12K to 16K or 16K to 20 or 24K on that wall. You don't really see it. It doesn't resolve really like you wouldn't think. It's not. So even if we did 24K, it wouldn't be that big of a difference noticeably. But 8K to 12K is a huge difference. If you show an 8K plate
Okay.
and you show a 12K plate, that's a huge difference. So resolution is very important. And that's where Octane Render Engine really shines, because I initially tried to do I initially had my pipeline built around cycles, around Blender's internal cycles, and it worked great at 4K, at 8K, but as soon as I went above 8K, it started to run into lots of problems. And one of the particular things is motion blur is extremely important. If you're going to do driving content for virtual
Yeah.
production, you need motion blur to be as realistic as possible, which means it needs to be baked in. I've tried motion vectors and doing it in compositing, and if you're doing it again with 360, there's lots of issues with that. So baking in motion blur is extremely important. Well, motion blur is also very processor intensive, especially for cycles. So with cycles, I could render 12K with no motion blur, but if I render 12K with motion blur, if the scene is even kind of big, it's just going to crash. It's just not going to work. The other thing that I found, and I'm not still this kind of puzzles me, but I found that the kind of get diminishing returns as well. So with 8K cycles, it seems very sharp, but at 12K, it doesn't really seem any sharper. And I would expect that the more resolution, the more pixels, you would get sharper and sharper, and that does happen with Octane. But with cycles, it just doesn't seem. I don't know. If I compared the two, if we're into the same things in Octane and in cycles, we would find that Octane is actually sharper, and I don't know why. I can't really explain why. And then the last one, really, one of the well, there's two more big parts why Octane is my render engine of choice for this project and for a lot of my projects. The deep level of custom AOVs and all the things you can do with the AOVs and the render passes and the render layers, I feel like it's just a lot more advanced. Blender has come a long way, but it's cycles, but it's not. There's not quite as far as Octane, and I feel like every release Octane comes out with new. Oh, now you can denoise the individual AOVs, and now you can do this, and all that stuff is really helpful. But then the last one really has to do with the render network, and I know that the render network's bringing on Redshift, and they're bringing on Cycles, and I think Arnold, and probably every render engine, which is awesome, and I'm all about that. I think it's really, really great. But as of 6 months ago, and probably for the near term as well, Octane render engine is obviously supported very well on the render network, and so the ability to be able to send a 2-minute 12K by 6K, really high sample rate, path traced render to a farm and have it come back, a few hours later be done, is really, it's something that is absolutely vital to this pipeline. To put it in context, like I have, probably 5 or 6 A6000 GPUs in my local render farm, and it would probably take me a month, or at least several weeks to render one of our shots at full resolution, at full length. It'd take me several weeks, so
just repeat that again. So it would take you a month or at least a couple of weeks to render the shot.
Yeah, if I was trying to do this locally, even with several machines and several A6000s, several high-end GPUs, it would take a long time. Probably 2 weeks to a month. One of them we did do. It took about 2 weeks for me to render. I don't remember how many GPUs I was running at that time. I think what I was doing at the time. This is the other thing that was really cool about Octane is their local. The way they do the local rendering. It's very simple to set up. So I had at our office we had like 30 machines. And so I had, I think, one machine with 2 A6000s just dedicated, just running the whole time for rendering. And then at night, all our artists are done for the day. Now I'm going to, spin up these 5 machines, these 10 machines, and they're all going to just continue rendering this sequence. And it's very simple to set up and do. So it's a little hard to say how many machines, but I would think, with 4 or 5 machines, it would have taken at least 2 weeks to render.
Wow.
And that was one of our easier shots. That was a daytime shot, I believe. And so, and there's a lot of tricks we could do to make render times come down a little bit. But when you're at 12K resolution and you're baking and you're doing all these AOVs, there's only so much you can do. So we've delivered a few shots now. We're just we're just really getting started with Simplates, but we've delivered a few, like basically turned them around. Like we put the scene together in a day, we rendered in a day, did all the compositing the third day, and we're done. And and 3 days from start to finish is a pretty insane timeline. I mean, really, the only way to do it is to have like 100 machines in a render farm, a local render farm. And that's just not. It's not something that's in our in our budget right now.
Yeah. So just to kind of clarify that, so it would take around 2 weeks to a month to render a sequence. And on the render network, what would you estimate that would take?
I would say it takes a few hours.
Few hours. Okay.
Yeah, a few hours.
Wow. Okay. So for your pipeline, that's kind of a big deal.
It's a huge deal. It's a massive deal. It's the difference between us being able to even provide custom services. Before I was already in the mindset that, well, we just can't provide custom plates. If someone asks us for a custom plate, we just have to say no, because even if we can build the scene quickly, it's going to take us weeks to render it. And then if something's wrong or there's a change, it's going to take us weeks to render it again. And that's just not something we can provide. But now it's like, no, absolutely, we 100% we can do custom work. What do you need done? And also even outside of the final renders, all of the QC renders, it's amazing to do, like the 4K render, for instance. Maybe that would take, with low samples, a 4K render, maybe it would take like, I don't know, like 12 hours or something like that. Well, that'll take like 30 minutes or something. It just takes no time at all.
Wow.
Maybe it takes an hour. And also, like, now I have it set up with my Dropbox, so I can literally like set off a render, send it out, and then it'll automatically download to my Dropbox, and I can QC it an hour later, like a 4K, 360, plate. And that by itself just speeds up the entire workflow. And like, if you want to keep working if you're working on one machine, you can just send it to the farm and keep working. You don't have to stop so it can render. I mean, it really, the whole pipeline and the whole workflow is just amazing to use the render network. I can't do it without it now. Now I'm like, there's no way. I would just, it would be very painful for me to try to do it any other way.
Well, I think that's that's an incredible testament to the render network. That's perfect. Yeah, it's I think there's a lot of artists who have used it who absolutely depend on the render network now.
Oh yeah,
because it's literally revolutionized their workflow.
I believe it. I mean, I'm one of them. So yeah, it really is. The other thing that I love about it is, I'm one of those weird people that use both Mac and PC. And so our pipeline right now, and probably for the foreseeable future, is my main 3D artist does most of the work in Blender, Octane for Blender, and then he exports the Orbex files, and I finish it all in Octane standalone. And so a lot of times I'll just use my MacBook Pro, and I'll just bring in the Orbex. I'll do all my work on the MacBook Pro, and then I'll upload it to the cloud. And that's been really, again, also something that's been really helpful, is even when we're traveling, like, or I'm on the road, or I'm on a flight, or whatever, I can just keep working even on the MacBook Pro. And every release they're getting faster and faster on the Mac too. So that's interesting.
Yeah.
But being able to just sort of go back and forth has been really great, because my PCs, I have several of them, really high end ones. But they often get tied up at a stage. That when I was shooting the feature film, both of them were at the stage. And it's like, well, if they were here and I had it set up, I would certainly be using Octane on those. They would render faster, and they have more storage space, etc. But it's nice to be able to not need them, to be like, oh, I'll just throw it on my Mac, and then, because none of my rendering's happening locally, it doesn't matter. I'll just send it to the cloud and download it straight to my Mac. I'll do the compositing and just be done.
Yeah, that's incredible. And for new artists that are considering using the render network, I mean, you've already shared how the render network has kind of transformed your workflow.
Yeah.
But what would you say are some of the most important steps or best practices they should follow to ensure like a smooth and efficient rendering process?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think, for me personally, I think one of the things that a lot of 3D artists don't fully understand well enough is what can be done in compositing, and what different AOVs and different render layers actually give you. And that's actually, I think, actually a really, it's kind of a missing, it's kind of one of the missing puzzle pieces of, well, you have the option to use Octane Render Engine and get these different passes and then composite them later. And if you learn that part of the skill set, which is a different skill set altogether, but if you learn some of that, then you can get a lot more mileage out of any render engine, but certainly from the cloud as well. Of like, well, I think this is what my color looks like and this is how my lighting looks like, but I'm going to render these lighting passes separately so that I can tweak the lighting once it's when it's actually finished rendering. But yeah, I would say, so I think that's probably a long way around saying that, I think you do have to sort of figure out what your pipeline is and what you need to render out and how you're going to composite it together. And once you figure that out, and you don't need the render network necessarily to figure that part out, but once you figure that out, then that's going to help your process going to the render network. The other big part, again, along the same lines of the compositing side is the color space and the file formats and all that sort of stuff. So for me, I stick to EXR. I use 16-bit DWA for most things, and I use scene linear. sRGB scene linear is what I use for color. And there's a lot of information. There's a lot of misinformation. A lot of people like to use ACEs. ACEs is a totally acceptable workflow, but in my opinion, you can run into a lot more mistakes if you don't understand ACEs well. So you do need to understand those things, especially before you send a long render to the render network in ACEs, and then you don't know how to work in ACEs, or you send it in scene linear and you don't know how to work in scene linear, or etc. So I think it's actually everything around the 3D program and the render. It's all the stuff that comes after you render. Those are the things that I think take a long time to sort of sort out. What is your pipeline? What are the render passes you need? And how are you going to composite it? How are you going to do color? What monitor are you finishing on? And those are the things you have to think about even before you submit to the render network. But yeah, I mean the and the other ones are kind of probably pretty obvious. Like, let's say you're doing a long animation, render out 1 second of the full res, full everything, and see what that looks like. Render out low res of the entire animation, and to see, are there any junk frames? Are there any like, issues with motion blur once you get to halfway through your clip? Those sort of QC things, they can be annoying. Where you're like, I'm so close. I just want to finish this thing. I want to get it out the door. But they're really necessary, because you'll end up, wasting time and money if you go and render the final thing without knowing for sure it's going to work. So that's another big one, I think.
Very important, and some really good tips there. So as a grant recipient from the Render Foundation, what advice would you give to artists who may be hesitant to try the Render Network?
I would say first of all, I think if you're doing any sort of animation, if you're rendering animation, I really highly recommend using the Render Network, and for all the reasons that we've already talked about many of them. But I think that you should at least be aware. You should use it. You should learn how it works, even if you don't need it right now. You should definitely become familiar with it. You should get used to it, because it does open up a lot of doors for you. And the next job, maybe your client needs something faster, and for you to have an understanding of how long it takes, how much it costs, all those sorts of things are really going to help you budget for a project, and maybe allow you to take on bigger projects than your company can have normally taken on, because now you have the ability to essentially scale up to hundreds of machines to do your renders. I think there's nothing to worry about in terms of you can in the Render Network, it gives you an estimate. You put in some information and it'll estimate how much it's going to cost. So there's no real hidden, or there's no like, you don't go press render and then, oh, suddenly this is 10 times more than you thought it was going to be. There's an estimator there at the end. So if you haven't gone through the process, I highly recommend just take something low resolution that you're familiar with, and go all the way up to the last step and just see, well, what would this cost if I rendered it on priority? What would it cost if I rendered it on economy? I think that you'd be surprised. I mean, compared to other render farms out there, it's very reasonable. Even their priority I think is very competitive with a lot of the other render farms. So the cost is not is you shouldn't be scared of the cost. And the other thing is, if once you press render or once you press start, you can see the credits and how many it's going to take, and so you can always stop it. So that's another thing that you could do if you're hesitant to get started. And then lastly, don't be afraid to ask for a grant. They have a fantastic grant program. They want to support. They really want to support local artists and everything else. So put in a grant if you have an idea for a passion project, or you have a project coming up, you just want to test it. I would say just apply for a grant and see if that gets you anywhere, because it can't hurt. It can't hurt. But yeah, again, I'll say it one more time. I think if you're doing animation and you have to render out, anything more than like 100 frames, I would highly suggest that you learn, even if you're not going to do it for this project that you're working on right now, try it out and test it and get used to it and learn it, because it's going to allow you to get to the next level for your company, or if you're a freelancer, for yourself.
Yeah, those are some very wise words. And we kind of touched on it a little bit earlier, but there are more render engines being added to the network. So right now, Octane is supported. Octane, made by Otoy. It's one of the most photorealistic render engines out there that are used in various productions. You'll see renders from Octane used, and also rendered on the Render Network, used in, I think, The Peripheral, an Amazon show, which was amazing, by the way.
Yeah.
And yeah, so many other shows. It's like, we learn about these, obviously, like after they've been done, and, just knowing that the network, this decentralized network of GPUs, so other people's machines all across the globe, have been used to render some of these sequences. And that still blows my mind.
Yeah.
Yeah. And Blender Cycles, so that's coming to the network, and also Redshift.
Mm-hmm.
There's a very famous YouTuber, well, a 3D artist, Andrei Lebrov, who recently went to IBC in Amsterdam and did an interview with the CEO, or perhaps the founder. I think it's the CEO of Maxon. And they talked about Redshift and the Render Network as well, and how excited they are that it's actually on the network now, because it's been quite a while since it was announced, and there's been a lot of development that they didn't expect there to be, but it just took a little bit longer to come. But now it's here. It's going to open the door to so many artists who use Redshift for their day as their daily driver.
Yeah.
So I think that's going to be amazing. And getting to know the Render Network is, it's one of those tools you'll have in your toolbox.
Yes. Yeah. Agreed.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, it's very exciting that there's different render engines coming. I think the more the better.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think Arnold is one that's that was mentioned a while back as well. I'm sure they'll start development on that after Redshift is live. And Blender is live. I think they are the priorities for now. But just to quickly touch on the grants. So I'm going to try and focus this right here. So you literally renderfoundation.com/grants, and you can submit a quick pitch, literally 500 words. Say what your project is, and what you want to do with the credits. And literally, it's free rendering on the Render Network. So it's like, if you're going to render something, you may as well apply for a grant.
Absolutely. Yeah, I'll also echo that the, applying is very simple. It was not this long. I've applied for grants before, and sometimes it's not worth filling out the application, because they want all this information and they want to verify. It's a very simple process with the Render Foundation. It's 500 words. You submit your name, you submit your thing, and like I said, genuinely, they want to support artists. So go apply.
Yeah, absolutely. Do it. Apply. So let's talk about simplates.
Yeah.
We've been dying to learn what simplates are, because some of our audience may not know what they are.
Yeah.
You've kind of touched on it already, but let's deep dive. What is a simplate?
Simplate is It's a high resolution 360 video, pre-rendered, CG rendered video that goes on LED walls behind cars when they're shooting, car process work. So you imagine two actors in a car, and they film that scene from the driver's perspective. They film it from the passenger's perspective, from the back seat, from the front. 95% of the time you see that in any TV show or film, they're doing it on an LED wall today, and they're playing some content back there, and usually it's been photographed with a camera. Well, I'm basically creating those backgrounds with Octane, rendered on the Render Network, specifically for that world, and we're able to do things that are impossible or not practical to film with a real camera. We're also able to customize things. So if you go out and shoot downtown Los Angeles with a camera, and then you're like, oh, we want to get rid of these palm trees. With a real camera, that'd be very difficult. But with CG plates, with sim plates, we can create lots of variations from the same environment. We can go, oh, we want to change the sky. We want to change this. We can do a lot even through compositing. So we were talking about render layers earlier. So I just rendered one this morning, which was an LA scene. It's like kind of like a LA, and there's palm trees inside. Well, the palm trees I used as a separate render layer, so I can just take the palm trees out. So now I have a plate without palm trees, so it doesn't look like it's LA or Miami. So basically, we're solving lots of issues that would happen from traditional. Another big issue that we're solving is that all of our plates are loopable. So they're a minute long or 2 minutes long, and at the end of that minute, it's the last frame is the frame right before the first frame. So you never see a cut point. You could film all day on a stage, and you would never ever see a cut point. And that's a kind of a pain point right now. Of you have 2 minutes or less to get the take you need, and then it's going to cut, and then you better be either your editor's going to have to work around that, or you're going to have to come back and whatever. And even for the actors, it's a little jarring if you're going around a bend and then it just cuts. You're like, oh, well, now I was in the middle of my monologue and now I've lost my train of thought. So that's what sim plates are.
Okay, so that's a good primer on what sim plates are. So how does the quality of 12K 360 video rendered through the Render Network compare to that's produced by other render engines?
I think that, I've tried a lot of different render engines. I think that 12K rendered out of Octane, and the fact that I can render it, in a few hours on the Render Network, the quality level is higher than most other render engines, just right out of the gate. And a lot of that has just to do with the way that the Octane look, as people say. A lot of it is because it starts from an unbiased perspective as opposed to a lot of other engines. But it definitely has a more photorealistic look, and it's easier for me to light and make it look photoreal than it is in a lot of other render engines. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, a lot of artists use...
And the motion blur, which is key to sim plates. Motion blur looks really photoreal with Octane. A lot of other engines, it doesn't look that great.
Okay, so in 10 years' time, how do you see the Render Network evolving? This is a tough question.
Yeah.
Really tough question.
In 10 years' time, how's the Render Network going to evolve? Well, in 10 years, every render engine will be on there for sure. What would be really interesting, this is just a wild thought, it's a wild question, so I'm going to give you a wild thought. What would be really interesting is if in 10 years you could submit from one program and then render on a different render engine. I guess that would sort of, in this theoretical world of mine, they would all be using the same material, like Material X or something.
Yeah.
But maybe there would be. I think in 10 years, 10 years is a long time, and I can imagine that the Render Network and a lot of the bigger companies also might move towards like USD as a standard, Material X as a standard.
Yeah.
So it might actually be possible for you to work on a scene in cycles, upload it to the Render Network, and then go, for this scene, it would be great if we rendered it in Arnold or Corona or whatever. And you literally could just render it from, you could cross, you're like, you know what? I want to render the water pass and reflection pass from this render engine, and I want to do it from different from this render engine. That would be pretty interesting.
Yeah, that would be insane. Yeah. I was going to mention earlier that some of the artists that I've spoken with, yeah, they love using Octane because of the motion blur, how realistic it is,
Yeah.
and also um, how refractions and reflections are handled, and
Yeah.
how just photorealistic it is. Yeah.
Yeah, and there's a lot too on the like the camera imaging side. They try to, you know, they're constantly, even still, like in the last release, they're adding features that emulate real camera artifacts and things that filmmakers look for. They want the distortion. They want these things, and so I do think that's something that they do really well, and continue to move towards. The other thing that we haven't talked about that I did want to mention is that we are building tools specifically for Octane for Blender.
Okay.
So we have one of them is just it's Octoscatter. It's a scattering system for Octane's system. So Octane has a built-in scatter system that works through materials, but if it's a little bit hard to use from a user standpoint, it's a little bit difficult to use. And even just to wrap your mind around. But once you figure it out, especially for things like vegetation, trees, grass, shrubs, it's phenomenal. I mean, you can just put 100 million polygons, and it just, you know, it's very efficient the way it works. So we've built our own plugin that just simplifies the whole process and has some assets built in. And then the other one is working title Octo City, but basically a fully procedural city built with Octane for Blender. So you can drag, I want there to be more 4 lanes instead of 2 lanes. I want the buildings to be taller. I want there to be more parks. I want there to be, these are all like just sliders that you can just slide and create your own, you know, procedural city. These are tools
cool.
we're basically building for ourselves for Simplates that now we're going to sell and to license to the community.
Awesome. So how would our community members access these? Where do they need to go?
You can go to alexpearce3d.com. By the time this is up, I'll have a landing page for that.
Nice.
But yeah, Alex Pearce, ALEXPEARCE, 3D.com, and that'll have a link to all of our products, including Simplates, which also has its own website, sim-plates.com.
Perfect. Alex, it has been amazing having you. It's been a pleasure speaking with you and learning about your workflow and how the Render Network has really impacted your work. And yeah, I would love to chat to you again sometime in the future.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me on. Thank you to the Render Network for giving me a grant and for helping me along. I'll also say the support from Render Network has also been really great. Any issues I've had or any questions I've had, even if there are user errors, you know, that you guys have been so helpful, and I really appreciate it. And I appreciate all the work that you're doing and that you're adding new render engines. I think this is it's a really great product already, and I think that you know, I'm excited to see where it goes.
So am I. So am I. Excellent. Right. Until next time, guys. Take care.
Bye.